Well, we have been working our way towards the crucifixion, towards the resurrection in the Gospel of Luke, and today is no different. We are coming down. I remember how I said last week we looked at the upper room and the Lord's Supper, and really it was kind of the calm before the storm. It was those last moments of calm right before everything hit. Well, they leave right out of the upper room and they walk down, and if you know the story, they walk into the Garden of Gethsemane. And there, Jesus prays. And that's what we're going to look at today is the events taking place right in the Garden of Gethsemane. This is found in Luke chapter 22. And here is the final hours of Jesus' life leading up to the cross. And if you've read this story before, if you've read this passage before, if you know what happens in the garden, then you know that there's some weight to this. Right? This is a weighty passage of Scripture because it is a moment where Jesus is praying and he's anxious, right? He's worried. He's distressed. He's distressed. Maybe that's the word to use. And as I've sat with this passage all week, I've wondered this question: what was Jesus so anxious about? What was Jesus so distressed about? And the easy answer, obviously, is the cross, right? The pain, the suffering, the death. And yes, I think it's part of it. But I think there's something deeper happening in this passage. It's not fear. It's not just pressure. It's that Jesus himself is coming in the garden to this breaking point. We've been talking about the breaking point of everybody involved in the story up to this point, but now we're looking at this breaking point of Jesus himself. Not a moment of weakness, but a moment where he recognizes the full weight of evil and suffering and darkness are colliding together with him, and something's going to have to give. This is the moment, about to be the moment that everything, even from the beginning of humanity, if you go back to the very beginning in Genesis, when sin enters the world, the prophecy that the serpent will bite his heel and but the serpent will be crushed, prophecy from the very first moments of the history of the world are coming to fruition in this moment, about to right now. And so I think that all of that is building into this moment. And really, it's a moment where, by all human standards, everything should fall apart. Right here in this moment is almost the breaking point of history. It's where Jesus comes and surrenders. Theologians have said that the battle of the cross was won in the garden. And so very much so that the passage we're going to read today is really this defining moment in the history of the worlds. You can write this in if you have your sermon notes. That the breaking point is bigger than we think. The breaking point is bigger than we think. Let's pick up in verse 39. And he came out and went, as was his custom, to the Mount of Olives. And the disciples followed him. And when he came to the place, he said to them, "Pray that you may not enter into temptation." Again, we said there, it says he came out and went, right? And we're really picking this up right as we left it off last week. So he came out of the upper room where he was with his disciples, and they went to the garden, as was their custom to do, as was part of their rhythms. And Jesus says something really interesting to his disciples. He looks at them and he says, "Pray." Pray. That's it. Not strategize, not plan, not prepare the plan, not get your defenses ready. He says, pray. Why? Because in this moment, he wanted them to do what was most important to him. He wanted them to join him with what he was going to do because Jesus knew that the moment that was coming was bigger than they realized. The breaking point moment was bigger than they could have ever imagined that was coming. They think it's just another night, although a little bit of a weird one, if we've been reading the story with us, but they're like still under the impression that this is just kind of another Passover, another night. They're in a familiar place in the Garden of Gethsemane, another moment with Jesus. But Jesus knows that everything is about to change. And he says something specific. He says, pray that you may not enter into temptation. That word temptation is an interesting one because in the Greek, it could both mean temptation or it could mean trial. So Jesus isn't just saying, pray that you don't sin. Instead, he's saying, pray that you can withstand what's coming. Because I know that this trial is coming, this big thing is coming, and I need you guys to pray because it's about here. And this moment really is so layered as we continue to read into the story and on the story. On one level, what's going to happen next is very much physical. Jesus will be arrested. He'll be dragged from place to place, trial to trial. He'll stand trial in front of rulers and authorities. He'll be beaten. He'll be crucified. And that's the real physical, immediate thing. But on another level, there's so much more depth happening here. There's things happening beyond just the physical. Because in this moment, this is the moment where darkness is wanting to rise, where Satan thinks he's going to get the final victory, where evil looks like it's going to gain some ground on Jesus. And the forces of evil that have been building for generations are converging in this moment. This is the moment where Satan thinks he's going to win the war. Jesus knows this. And so because of all of that, it's almost as though history itself is leaning into this story, wondering what's going to happen. It's almost as though the angels and the demons and all the spiritual realm is leaning forward to see what's going to take place next. This is a breaking point. And it feels like everything could unravel, the moment where it feels like evil could actually win. But right there, in the middle of that moment, in the middle of that pressure, Jesus is there. And what's he doing? He's praying. He's praying. And he invites his disciples, and really he invites us to do the same. Because here's what Jesus knows that they don't fully understand yet. That if you don't pray ahead of your breaking point, if you're not in prayer when the breaking point hits, you won't stand when it does. And so before it gets crazy, before the night gets crazy, before the moment gets crazy, Jesus is offering an invitation to his disciples. Pray. Pray that you may not enter into temptation. We see next in the story, you can write this in, that at the breaking point, though, Jesus surrenders. At the breaking point, maybe of history, Jesus surrenders to his Father. Notice what it says, verse 41. And he withdrew from them about a stone's throw, and he knelt down and prayed, saying, Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. And there appeared to him an angel from heaven, strengthening him. And being in agony, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. Jesus withdraws. He goes a little bit further away from the disciples, and he kneels and he prays. And notice, this is not hesitation. In fact, Luke has been trying to tell us all along throughout his whole gospel that this is the moment that Jesus has been driving to, right? If you've been reading the Gospel of Luke, or if you do read the Gospels, like it's very clear that Jesus is on mission. So this prayer right here isn't a prayer of hesitation as much as it is a surrender, because he feels the weight of it all. Jesus is beginning to stare into the full reality of suffering, the depth of human sin, and the moment where darkness will have its hour. And at his breaking point, Jesus doesn't run, he surrenders. I love this line. He says, remove this cup. That's honesty. Nevertheless, that's surrender. And I want us to hear this clearly. Surrender isn't the absence of desire, it's a submission of desire. Let me say that again. Surrender is not the absence of our desire, it's the submission of our desire. And God says, Luke says that God sent an angel to minister to him, to be there with him, to strengthen him. God doesn't remove the cup from Jesus, but he strengthens Jesus in the moment. And this is critical for us to understand, because there's so many times in our lives where we will pray this prayer, God, get me out of this. God, I don't want to do this. Get me out of this moment. I don't want to do this anymore. And God often answers, I'll strengthen you in the midst of it. I may not walk you out of this, but I'll be there with you in it. That God often responds to suffering with strength, not escape. And if you're in a moment where you feel like this cup is not being removed from you, I want you to hear that God has not abandoned you, that he's here strengthening you. Because the good news of the gospel is that God meets us in our breaking points. There is where we will find him in the midst of it. Third thing you can write in from this is that when we don't pray, we will default to the flesh. So remember what Jesus had left these guys and told them to pray. Pray that they didn't enter into temptation. And then he goes off a stone's throw away, and he's spent time praying. He's been in agony praying. He's been surrendering his will. He's been greatly distressed. Let's check in on what the disciples have been doing. And when he rose from prayer, he came to the disciples and found them sleeping for sorrow. And he said to them, "Why are you sleeping? Rise and pray that you may not enter into temptation." Jesus is sweating what Luke would describe as so intense of a moment where he's sweating great drops of blood, and the disciples are sleeping. They're overwhelmed, they're exhausted, they're confused. And honestly, it's easy, as we read this story, isn't it true? They don't look very good here, right? The disciples don't look, this isn't their proudest moment, right? This is like them in the boat being like, Jesus, don't you care about us that we're going to drown because the storm's going on? I think this is one of their freak out moments where they don't look very good in this moment. But I think we can identify with it, right? If we're honest, right? Because, man, they had been going, we can at least understand. They had been going and going and going. Even just take this last week of their life as we've been studying it out, they have been on the move. They have been hit from every side. They're confused. They're not only physically exhausted, they're mentally exhausted, they're spiritually exhausted. Everything is just kind of coming to this moment. But the one thing that they were supposed to be doing, they were not doing. The one thing that Jesus said for them to do, they were not doing. If you look at other gospel writers and their accounts of it, we fill in some more of the details, where actually Jesus comes back a first time and then he leaves and he comes back and they're sleeping again. These guys just couldn't keep their eyes open, right? And Jesus is concerned about them. They're not praying, and Jesus connects the dots for us. Prayer is the preparation for pressure. Because in just a few minutes, everything is about to hit all at once. Fear, conflict, danger, public pressure. And Jesus knows that they're not ready. And Jesus knows that they weren't ready for it. Because again, if we're not in the pattern of prayer in our lives, when the pressure hits, when the breaking points come, we will default to our flesh. We'll default to what seems most naturally for us to do in the moment. And most often, if we're not prayed up, that will be reacting out of the flesh. That's exactly what these guys do. And while he was still speaking, there came a crowd, and the man called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. And he drew near to Jesus to kiss him. But Jesus said, "Judas, would you betray the Son of Man with a kiss?" And when those who were around him saw what would follow, they said, "Lord, shall we strike with the sword?" And one of them struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his right ear. But Jesus said, "No more of this." And he touched the ear and healed him. Then Jesus said to the chief priests and the officers of the temple and the elders who had come out against him, "Have you come out against a robber with swords and clubs? When I was with you day after day in the temple, you did not lay a hand on me. But this is your hour and the power of darkness." Jesus is not even finished talking, and a mob of people come in the garden. The moment arrives. Judas walks up and betrays Jesus with a kiss. The crowd, the mob there is stirred with violence in their minds. They have swords, they have clubs, they're ready to take Jesus by force. They've come out ready to take a battle. Everything escalates so quickly. And one of the disciples says, "Lord, is this the moment, right? Is this where we grab swords? Is this where it all goes down?" And before Jesus could even say a word, Peter, Luke doesn't say it, but we know it from other gospel writers, Peter grabs a sword out and chops off the right ear of one of the high priest's servants. And Jesus just has to be like, "Guys, this is what I'm talking about. This is what I was warning you about. How fast this happens. No prayer, no pause, just reaction, right? The moment gets crazy and they just react in the flesh. And this is what prayerlessness produces. We react instead of trust. We control instead of surrender. We fight with what God is actually doing all along. But look at Jesus in the exact same moment. He stops the violence. He heals the ear. And he gives himself over willingly. Same moment, same pressure, two different responses. It's fascinating, this whole moment, right? This whole scene. You've been in moments in life, right, where things just got chaotic real quick, where you weren't expecting it, and all of a sudden life just got chaotic. Maybe it was relationally, and something just blew up, and now everybody's tense, and everybody's sending text messages, everybody's, right? And it's just like, whoa, right? Maybe it's a health thing. You were cruising along and everything was great. You thought everybody in your life was healthy, and then all of a sudden, boom, you're right in the middle of it. we don't know when the breaking points of life come. We don't know when it's happening, but Jesus is reminding us, hey, stay prayed up. Pray that you may not enter into temptation, so when everything in life gets crazy, that you won't react just in the flesh in the moment. Because, man, if we're honest, if we take a step back after like reacting in the flesh, we're like, ooh, that was an ugly scene, right? Because when we react in the flesh, we send the text message that ends up biting us in the butt for years to come. When we react in the flesh, we end up saying something in a conversation that we later have to apologize for. When we react in the flesh, we end up spending a whole night awake, worried and racked with worry and anxiety rather than trust in the Lord. When we react in the flesh, nothing good happens. And friends, we react in the flesh because we're not prepared through prayer often. When we're not surrendered to God in prayer, we try to control situations out of our own wisdom. But when we are surrendered, we can trust. We can trust that Jesus is in the midst of that and he knows what to do. I find it interesting, just because we have a few moments. This whole scene it gave me pause as I was just thinking about it this week. And another thing that's taking place, another kind of subplot, another thing that's taking place in this whole movement of Jesus towards the cross is that Jesus knows that he needs the 12 disciples, the 11, because Judas is gone. He needs these guys to be able to work through these next few days to get them onto the other side of the resurrection, because he knows that those 11 guys are going to be the ones who launches the church. At the day of Pentecost, these are going to be the guys that he's relying upon to take the message of the gospel to the world, to really launch the new covenant life in Christ. Like once Jesus sends, so Jesus knows the big picture, what's happening here, right? And he's like, guys, I need you to pray because it's going to get crazy for about 3 days. And you're not going to, and all this stuff that I've been talking about, you don't understand, but I need you to be around after 3 days and just try to not do anything dumb for the next 3 days, which is going to be tough for you guys. But try, because once I resurrect from the dead, I'll appear to you and then we can get the plan going. I've tried to warn you, but you just haven't believed me. So we're going to need to hang on. Then what do? So he's like, please be praying. Please be praying. Don't react in the flesh. Don't react in the flesh. The first thing Peter does is like, is it sword time, Jesus? Boom, right ear off. And Jesus is like, man, Peter, I can't have you in prison. I can't have you hanging next to me on another cross. Which really, Peter just cut off the right ear of the high priest's servant. I think Jesus grabs this ear and he puts it back and he's like, and if they were going to grab Peter and arrest him for violence and cutting off the ear, take him to trial, how would that look in trial, right? He cut off what ear? Look. It's on his body, right? All's good. Jesus is orchestrating this whole thing. Jesus is working this whole thing out. And that's the great news, friends, that despite our idiotic moments at times, where we react in the flesh, where we just we're not prayed up, we're not prepared, and so we just do something dumb. Jesus is there. Jesus can even work through our dumb moments, our human moments, our things, and he can bring things back together. That's the beauty of grace. That's the beauty of God. It's the beauty of Jesus working in the midst of the chaos. We've seen it all along in the Gospel of Luke. And it doesn't change. Even when Jesus is under the most intense pressure of his life, he still is in complete control. So if he's able to be in complete control in the most chaotic moments of his life, we can know and trust that he's going to be in control in the most chaotic moments of my life and of your life. Unfortunately for Peter, it doesn't turn good yet. The story doesn't get better for Peter from this moment. You can write this in. Following Jesus from a distance leads to denial. Following Jesus from a distance leads to denial. Let's continue to hear about what Peter did. Then they seized him and led him away, bringing him into the high priest's house. And Peter was following, and I want you to notice that, underline it in your Bible, underline it, at a distance. He was following at a distance. And when they had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat together, Peter sat down among them. Then a servant girl, seeing him as he sat there in the light and looked closely at him, saying, "This man also was with him." But he denied it, saying, "Woman, I do not know him." And a little later, someone else saw him and said, "You also are one of them." But Peter said, "Man, I am not." And after the interval of about an hour, still another insisted, saying, "Certainly, this man was also with him, for he too is a Galilean." But Peter said, "Man, I do not know what you are talking about." And immediately, while he was still speaking, the rooster crowed. And the Lord turned and looked at Peter. And Peter remembered the saying of the Lord and how he had said to him, "Before the rooster crows today, you will deny me 3 times." And he went out and wept bitterly. Peter follows, but at a distance. At a distance. This phrase is small, but it's loaded because it tells something about what's happening in Peter's heart long before he ever speaks a word. He's still following Jesus, but not closely. He's still present, but not fully committed in that moment. He's still connected, but he's giving space. And that distance, it matters. Remember Peter? He's the bold one, right? He's the one that would jump out of the boat. He was the one that was always first to say something. He was right there with Jesus. He was the one that even just a few hours ago in the upper room where he's like, "Jesus, even if everyone else bails on you, even if everyone else abandons you, I'm your guy. I'm sticking with you. There's nothing that could separate us." And all of a sudden, chaos hits, and Peter's like, "I'll follow, but from a distance." And now he's quiet, cautious, blending in, warming himself by the fire, but by the wrong fire. And as he sits in the courtyard, we see 3 different people say, you were with Jesus, right? And he gets so obstinate, he's saying, "No, it's someone else. No, it's not me." And then finally, he just kind of gets more and more. He's like, "I don't know him. I don't know. Man, get out of here. I don't even know the guy." Each time, each denial, Peter backs away a little bit more. And then the rooster crows, and in that moment, everything that was chaotic becomes clear for a second in Peter's brain. And he remembers what Jesus said just hours ago. Luke includes this little detail that Jesus looked and saw him. No words are recorded, just a look. Friends, we don't know what that look was, but it crushed Peter. Knowing Jesus, I don't think it was a scowl. I don't think it was an angry look, but it was an honest look. And Peter couldn't handle it. He couldn't handle the weight of that, and so he leaves and he weeps bitterly. Peter breaks. But what I want us to see is that distance almost always precedes denial. That we usually don't deny Jesus out of nowhere. First, we drift and follow at a distance. We create space between us and him. Maybe it's in our habits or in our priorities or in our prayer life or in our dependence upon him. We don't deny him, but we just drift. We don't outright say, I don't know him yet, but we follow at a distance. And here's where it connects back, right, to the big picture. A prayerless life leads to a reactive life. When the moment and the pressure grew, we see Peter, he cuts off this ear. We see him follow at a distance. We see him deny Jesus because he wasn't surrendered. He wasn't in prayer. He wasn't spiritually prepared for the moment that he was walking into. Isn't that crazy? Like the same night, same pressure, two different breaking points. We have Jesus at his breaking point, surrendered fully, praying honestly, strengthened by God, walking forward in obedience. And Peter at his breaking point, sleeping instead of praying, reacting in the flesh, following at a distance, collapsing under pressure. Two breaking points, same events taking place, two different reactions. What does that show us? That at the crux of our breaking points, a surrendered life matters. A prayed up life matters. Because in this breaking point, it looked like darkness was winning, evil prevailing, everything looked like it was falling apart. But really, in the reality, this is where God was, in this very moment, was where God was doing some of his greatest work. When everything seems like it was chaotic and falling apart, God was at work in that moment. What looked like defeat was actually victory in disguise. And that's what Peter couldn't see, because he was just reacting out of the flesh. He couldn't see what was happening spiritually, that what looked like the end was actually beginning. So what does that mean for us? We all know what breaking points feel like. We've experienced them. And we all know that they can feel overwhelming, that it feels like everything is falling apart at times, where darkness seems to be winning. That in this moment, where everything kind of shouts, this is the end. Luke 22 tells us a different story. That we can have confidence in our breaking points, and that God is in them with us, and that he is working in them, and that he will meet us in those moments if we will allow him. Because really, everything in Luke 22, this should have been the end. This should have fallen apart. Everything should have fallen apart. But Jesus steps into the middle of it and carries it through to the other side. Jesus didn't avoid it. He didn't escape it. He didn't collapse under it. He surrendered to the will of God. Jesus said the prayer that you and I should pray often. God, this is what I want, but nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. And since Jesus absorbed the greatest breaking point in the history of the world, my breaking point no longer has to be a place of collapse. It can become a place of surrender. That when we find ourselves on the edge, when we find ourselves in the middle of it, when we find ourselves under pressure, when it feels like we want to give way, we don't have to run, we don't have to numb it, we don't have to escape from it, we don't have to medicate it, we don't have to do any of those things, because we have a Savior, Jesus, who we can follow his footsteps and surrender our lives again and again to the God. And I know that for so many of you, you've already done that. At one point you said, God, I surrender to you. You've given your life to Jesus, and you're in him. But friends, surrendering to Jesus is a one-time moment, but it's also a lifetime moments, right? It's a moment in time, and it's also linear, right? Because if you know, many of you know this, that there are going to be moment after moment after moment where you're going to have to resurrender and resurrender and resurrender and resurrender and resurrender. And sometimes all of those resurrenders is in the same hour. Because if you're anything like me, I'll surrender something to God and then I'll grab it right back and be like, no, I think I want to control it, right? And then I'll say, no, God, I really believe that you would do best in this situation. And I'll be like, okay, you got it, you got it. And then like 2.5 minutes later, I'm like, but I want it back and I'm going to worry about it and I'm going to figure it out and I'm going to plan it and I'm going to strategize it and I'm going to do this. And I have to pray again and be like, God, not my will, but yours be done. I'm not the only one crazy, right? Like we've done this battle before. Right? In every moment where you're just like, I surrender, I promise it's yours, Jesus, I promise I'm going to let you have it. Nope, I'm not, I'm going to take it back. And back and forth we go. But we get the privilege of praying the same prayer that Jesus prayed in the garden. When he was in his breaking point, our prayer is the same as Jesus' prayer, not my will, but yours be done. Which doesn't make the pressure disappear, but it changes what the pressure becomes. It's the place where God meets us. It's the place where he begins his deepest work in us. I heard this week. I really liked it. The breaking point isn't where your story ends. It's where surrender begins and where God does his deepest work. And man, I've just found that to be true in my life. It means that the breaking points that we've been talking about this whole series long, it's not the end of our stories. It might just be the beginning. So let me wrap up with this question. What area of your life do you need to surrender to God? Because my guess is that for a lot of us, we've surrendered most of our life to God. My guess is that we've given God access to most of our life. But there's a piece that we want for ourselves. There's a piece that maybe we want to control. And if we're honest, that might be the piece that we keep stumbling over. It's the thing that we keep coming back to and saying, God, you can have 95% of my life, but this one right here, this job, this image, this promotion, this habit, this sin, this addiction, this medication, I think I can control it. I'll just warn you up front, if you live your life mostly surrendered to Jesus, but not fully, I love you enough to tell you this, that your breaking point's coming. That God will faithfully bring you to that place. And he'll meet you in the middle of it. But he'll bring you to a place where he says, where it's time to surrender. And I won't say it's going to be easy, but we can know that God's in it with us. And that when we finally leave, when we finally can live our whole lives surrendered to Jesus, open-handed before him, that our life will be more abundant, more full, because Jesus says that's what he came to do. Jesus came that we could experience life, and life to the full, life abundant, but only through him. So what is it for you? What area of your life do you still need to surrender to God? That's a question that you may not be able to answer today in this moment. but maybe it'll hit you sometime this week. Maybe there is something that's just right there, and you know that this is a thing that I got to give over. This is a thing that I got to give up, but you can't do it alone. Man, when we finish singing this song, I know we got to get to a work day and everything like that, but let's not run from this moment. My prayer all morning has been this: let's not run to the next thing before we focus in on what God has for us in this moment, before we let the word do what it's supposed to do in us. So before we even get to sandwiches and work, if you have an area of your life where you're like, I need to give this up. I need to lay this down. This is the moment of surrender. I would love to walk that with you. There's people in here that you could turn to that are sitting next to you, maybe that you could walk that through with. If there's not, then come talk to me, because I would love to answer this question, because this is what it's all about. Again, Jesus does what he does in the next 24 hours that we're going to study. He could do all that he did because he surrendered in the garden. The battle of the cross was won in the garden. And the win in the garden is surrender. And that can be your win today too. Let's pray. God, thanks for bringing us your word. Even the weight of the passages that we're talking about, even the weight of what this says to us is heavy. So I'm thankful that in that you're here, that you meet us in the midst of our breaking point. God, I pray that our hearts would say, nevertheless, but your will be done. That I want this real bad, but I want you what you want for me even more. And God, that we would come in moments of surrender, taking what we are holding on to and laying it down. In Jesus' name.